conversation stage. And that's to everyone joining us in here, live streamed elsewhere, and also our online audience. So thank you for joining us again. So I'm Anjana Ahuja. I'm your host for this stage, and we're talking about the big issues. And I'm really thrilled to be moderating this next session, which is thinking about one of the most important issues today. What are the public perceptions of AI? And if you were in the session before, you'll know that this is something that is concerning and it is a big issue because the public have some very interesting views about it, and we'll learn about those with our panel. So we're going to be in for a great debate, and I would love you to welcome to the stage Tracey Brown, Tania Duarte, Ben Lyons, and we'll also have David Leslie joining online. Sadly, he can't be with us in person today, but that's the joy of hybrid conferences. Thank you, David, for joining us. That's great. So please welcome our panelists. So I'm going to do what I did last time, which is I'm going to ask the panelists each to introduce themselves. Just take 1 minute to say who they are, where they're from, and why they're on this panel. So let's start with you, Tracey.
Thanks very much, Anjana, and thanks for having me. I'm Tracey Brown. I'm the director of Sense About Science, which is a charity that promotes the public interest in sound science and evidence. I'm a veteran of campaigns for transparency and for getting the evidence behind decisions clearly stated. That includes things such as the transparency of evidence framework that governments from Canada to the UK use to share the evidence behind policy decisions, through to all trials which mobilise tens of thousands of people around the world to change the law on clinical trial reporting. And I'm here because after 20 years of talking about public engagement and 40 years of putting right things that went wrong in medicine when some people were too clever to explain themselves and the rest of us were too dumb to ask questions, I find myself shocked to be in this space with the public wondering how to ask what's in it and does it work.
Brilliant, thank you, Tracey. Tania.
Hi, so I run a non-profit called We in AI, which aims to get a greater diversity of people involved in decision-making around AI right through the pipeline. That's been going for about 3 years. One of our projects is Better Images of AI, which is a global project that you may have come across. If not, I'll be plugging it, I'm sure. And I also have been working with the Turing Institute on their strategy, public engagement ecosystem strategy, which I believe is going to be launched tomorrow, very exciting, and work generally in looking at AI literacy and what that means.
Thank you, Tania. David, can I ask you to do the same, please?
Sure, it's great to be here. I'm David Leslie. I'm the Director of Ethics and Responsible Innovation Research at the Alan Turing Institute and a Professor of Ethics, Technology and Society at Queen Mary University of London. I think most sort of significantly, our work in the public policy program at the Turing has really focused over the last few years on finding where the rubber hits the road from, on the one side, the kind of the need to upskill and prepare society for digital transformation, specifically with regard to data-driven technologies. And on the other side, to really think about issues of social license, think about issues of public consent in the design, development, and deployment of AI systems. And so, you know, what the work that we do is bringing those two elements together. How do we have a sufficiently prepared public that can then embrace democratic governance of technology?
Thank you, David. And Ben.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ben. I lead the External Affairs and Insight team at the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, which sits within the government's Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. We help to drive trustworthy innovation in data and AI, and at the core of that is helping to build tools and approaches which enable organisations both in the public sector and the private sector to responsibly innovate in AI through a number of programs. At the core to this is public engagement and public understanding, so that we are able to understand or do as well as we can to understand where we are seeing both public concerns to different applications of AI in different contexts, and then to help teams which are working right across government to innovate in AI in a way that is foregrounding issues around where public concerns and public perceptions may be to enable that trustworthy innovation, which really centres the public in this space.
Excellent. So now you know who our panellists are and what they're about, and I'm going to pose each of them a specific question that talks to their expertise, and they can give us again a sort of brief answer. And then after that, we're going to have a panel discussion. Please do put your questions on Slido. Use the hashtag conversation_stage, I think it is. It should be on the screen at some point. And we'll take those towards the end. I might take questions as they come up if they're relevant to the conversation. So when in the lunch break, I decided to have a quick look on what public perceptions of AI are. And I found, it's an absolute minefield out there. But one of the interesting things was the Pew research poll from December. And this was polling the US public. And it says 15% of the US public are more concerned than excited about the increasing use of AI. Another really interesting side fact about that was that there was a questionnaire about what do you think contains AI? And of course, people, the Spotify recommendations came up. But also people thought COVID tests might contain them and thermometers might contain AI. So it's quite an interesting range of beliefs, public beliefs, and they differ according to income, whether you're male or female, but they don't differ along party lines, which is quite interesting. So my first question to Tracey is, what do we know about public perceptions of AI, and which publics are we talking about?
Well, I think, Anjana, in what you just said there is a good clue. It really depends on how you frame the question. If people think you're talking about robots and computers, you'll get a lot of positive answers about how their lives are going to be made easier, how we're going to be able to do certain things like environmental monitoring or assuring food safety much more easily. But I think, look, broadly about 1 in 5 people sort of articulate in surveys something that we would recognise as AI. I know Tania's done a much more detailed review of that. And I think the other thing that's interesting is nearly everything that talks to people about, that surveys the population about views of AI, is they ask whether they're negative or positive about it. And what struck me about this, as someone who has looked at public attitudes in a whole range of settings over many years, is that it's about a third, roughly. And that will tell you pretty much what people think about whether society works for them or doesn't work for them. So that third, third of people say probably going to be something good, third of people say probably going to be something bad, and the other people say I'm not quite sure. And you generally get that answer on everything that you ask society about. But broadly, what is coming across is that people are aware that this could go either way. That's something that's definitely out there, definitely abroad as a sentiment. But what they're not clear about is what decisions would actually make it go either way, and who's going to take them. And I think that's where our work is. Maybe we can take it through to who gets fired when stuff goes wrong. People are not sure where this decision point lies, and even how to articulate what that decision looks like. And I do think for many of us in this room, that is our place of work. That's where we have to articulate that. And when we talk about different publics, I think we're often talking about different user groups as well. Obviously, there's an alienation question, but we're also talking about people, heads of states, I think, don't quite know how to ask the right questions. So let's include them in a very broad definition of public. Excellent.
So a really interesting discussion about where the power lies, I expect, where the public perceive the power to lie. Tania, your question, are public perceptions of AI a problem? And if so, why?
So I don't know how many people came to the first session today, Gary Marcus, which was a great talk, and I think there's become, certainly with the launch of ChatGPT, a more pressing problem, or become more aware of it, which is, it's starting to become kind of individual safety. Like, do people actually know what they're interacting with? How, how reliable their source of information is? Are they going to go and eat glass, because they've been told to? So I think this is quite an interesting point, because I don't think we were really talking about it in these terms a year or so ago, in terms of people actually need to know where the information that they get, has come from. However, when we set up, we were kind of not quite there. We were looking very much at the fact that there's definitely so many parts of people's lives that AI impacts, and if they don't have a positive way to get involved in decisions around those uses, then we're going to have a lot of casualties in terms of societal impact, but we're also going to have a lot of impediments to innovation, because it's just going to get in the way. So you've talked a bit about trustworthy AI, Ben, and I think I would kind of say, I think it's important to have confidence. I don't know how close we are to trust, but certainly we want to have confidence, and that's very hard to have when you have no idea really what it is that you're being sold, that you're using, etc. So I think to kind of put it into a kind of 5-point summary, which I've put, because I struggle a little bit remembering things under lights, and I'm sitting on a chair which I think must have had data input into its design of tall people, or at least not really short people. So the data of my chair is, I'm kind of like a gnome. Anyway,
I'm really glad you said that, Tania, because I'm struggling to get my feet on the floor as well. But just
like,
maybe
it's my fishing
we're
rod.
just very short people here. But yes. No,
Anyway, so sorry. Yes, I will kind of just go to the list. So, for people to engage in the democratic process, which is kind of what I touched upon, we need to know, what questions we should be asking, how we should be participating in, bills that are being passed, or laws, or just challenging decisions. To be able to use technology well, so the adoption of technology, the consumer decisions we make, and those consumer decisions are really important, because that's really what drives a lot of decision making at companies, who are there for shareholder value at the end of the day. They're not there for societal good. So we need to be able to make good consumer decisions to tell companies what kind of tech that we're happy with. Employee responsibility and advocacy. Again, really important is that people in organisations, kind of have good, a good understanding and relationship with technology that they're using. So I'm talking about understanding as well as perceptions, but I think the two are very, very linked, because, your perception is based on what you perceive to be a fact, and quite often that is they're absolutely wrong. And then really importantly, to increase the diversity of people working in AI, making decisions about AI. A lot of the problems with AI are that lack of diversity. And to help us consider what it means now to be human, and think about what our education system needs to look like now, etc.
Brilliant, thank you. David, the question for you is, do AI researchers actually care what the public thinks about their work? And do they regard the public broadly as allies or adversaries, even Luddites?
This was a very driving journalistic question, and I appreciate it. One might even say it's loaded, which is even better. So I guess let me just start by maybe telling a little bit of a story here, which I think is something a story that we should pay attention to. And that's the let's say the recent history of tech caring about what the public thinks, right? So you roll back about 5 years to this time where you had the big early sort of revolts of the tech workers, right? So I'm thinking here about, there was an article published in 2019 called The False Promise of Silicon Valley's Quest to Save the World. And that was kind of picking up on these movements that were happening within, for instance, Microsoft. You had MS Workers for Good. You had Google workers kind of revolting against Project Maven, right? Where they were trying to sort of stake claim to the original motto of "Don't be evil," which was Google's original motto, right? And you had this moment where the kind of mission-driven rhetoric of early big tech was being kind of brought in front of the public by tech workers who were trying to sort of make right on the claims. And there's a deep, I think, sense of responsibility and caring there at that moment, where we did have designers, developers, deployers of systems, especially on the sort of technical side, really staking claim, if you will, to this need to sort of connect with the public, to this need to sort of be true to the do-gooder, rhetoric that was flying around at the time. And I think that what's interesting, if we fast forward now to a more recent history in tech, we still do see these kind of these streams of caring, right? We see how, for instance, it was a couple of years ago now, where we had these workers in Google ethics, for instance, writing this now sort of very famous paper on stochastic parrots, which has gained even more relevance now. But them sort of standing behind the paper, right, and in caring for the integrity of the position and how that would represent, the truth of the matter to the public, and what happened to them, right? You had those people were let go in the same way that more recently Microsoft let go its responsible AI team in light of a kind of rapid to the market movement with their own kind of work in generative AI. So it's all that just to say that I think from a certain position, a critical position, we do need to sort of acknowledge that, yes, I mean, there is a responsibility and a deep element of care and concern on the part of tech workers to the public to sort of be responsible and to respond to the reasonable demands of the public to have responsible and trustworthy innovation.
Thank you, David. So much to unpick in our panel discussion. Ben, my question to you is, if I can read my writing, should public perception be a rate-limiting factor in how quickly the UK achieves its AI ambitions?
I think it will be. And the way I would respond to that, I think, is that AI and public perceptions of it are incredibly context specific, and I think we've touched on this already. But in AI, we're talking about a general purpose technology, and so it's hard for people really to respond to these abstract questions. And and we've written a few of them ourselves and have come up with quite similar answers in terms of a bunch of people often kind of clustering in the middle in terms of and struggling somewhat to answer questions about their perceptions of AI. And I think that's that's because whether the effect of AI depends so significantly based on what it's used. And if you think of other general purpose technologies, if you think of electricity, for example, I mean, electricity can be used for things which are really beneficial in healthcare or other situations, things which are kind of banal but nice, like powering an electric toothbrush, and then electric chairs, or things which people would have real concerns about. And I think there is greater complexity within AI, clearly, but I think it is there is a real dependency about the context. And so when we ask questions of the public around their perceptions of AI, it varies quite significantly based on that application and based on that use case. So for example, people want more governance. They want they want more governance in areas, for example, around policing or around healthcare. They might be less concerned in procurement, back office functions, retail. So there's a sector-based approach, based concerns, and also kind of what are you using AI for? Is it to make decisions about me as an individual, which affects me significantly, or is it something that's more that's not necessarily going to affect me as an individual? And so I think if government and industry are not capable of earning public trust, then that will be a rate limiting factor. And so a lot of what we focus on is enabling trustworthy innovation. And I use that term intentionally because it's not just trust that you want. It's demonstrating behaviours which mean that you have a reason to be trusted over the long term in a way that's sustainable. So I'll take a couple of examples of kind of work that we're doing. So work on what we kind of call AI assurance. So the sorts of tools and approaches you can use to demonstrate trustworthy behaviours in terms of things like accuracy, legality of tools, so that consumers and industry can have an informed ability to know whether or not they can trust an AI product or tool. We're also doing lots of work in the public sector around algorithmic transparency. So we designed a public sector transparency standard, which was really co-designed and informed by public engagement, to ensure that the public sector have tools to be able to communicate how they are using algorithms to the public. So there's a lot more work to do, but I think that hopefully gives a flavour of some of the ways in which we're thinking about it in terms of needing to have these tools and approaches so that you can build trust and ensure that we can innovate but do so responsibly.
That's great. So that sets out really that there's some really big issues coming out of power, accountability, responsibility inside AI research, the value of context, and I want all of you actually to come in. And David, I know that it's going to be a bit tricky sometimes with the time lag. So if you want to come in on something, can you just kind of wave at me and we'll get you in if the lag is not working for you. But I want to explore, Tracey, you were talking about accountability, and I'm thinking that sort of Ben's touching on this as well. And Tania, you talk about how people feel about this, about where the power lies. Because you were talking about trustworthy innovation, and I hate to admit it, but I'm going to be honest, I kind of roll my eyes. And I'm just wondering how, is there a kite mark in a way for trustworthy innovation? And can one of you speak to this or speak with each other about this?
I do think that there's a lot to be done in the area of being trustworthy and behaving in a trustworthy fashion. And I do think it's for, with broad principles at the top, and it's for a lot of different sectors to actually figure out what does this mean for us, right? But one of the big warnings I put around this is if you're talking about social license, then, take some lessons from things like the GMOs, the genetically modified foods discussion. Because what happens there is people want to have a discussion about how their food is produced, whether they feel like they can trust in the authorities that are deciding its safety, the regulators who are allowing things into the food chain. On the back of, in the UK we had, BSE, in other areas, in other countries we had other scandals going on. And so it's that feeling that it lands on the technology and you could have done everything right in that. In fact, actually they did. There were also sort of environmental groups were involved in the development of that and so on, and they all just backed off as soon as the public located their frustration with not having power over the decision in their food chain. And I think we need to be careful of this. As soon as the public perceive that there is an abdication of responsibility, that frustration can land right on any technology or any process. And people are not tolerant of being told, computer says no, and I don't know why. And I think they will try to stick it back to somewhere. And so just be aware that, whilst behaving in a trustworthy fashion is really important, so too is understanding that the people that you give your product to must not overclaim for it. They must be able to not abdicate their own responsibility for decision making, whether that's a mortgage or providing a particular type of content. We need to be very wary of this rather. It is an anxious environment. We're living in an anxious policy environment where people would love to have difficult decisions about immigration handed right over to the black box, right? And no one has to stand there and stand up for their decisions. And so be aware of that there are discussions out there with the public where they feel that society is going out of control or the things that around them that need some sort of authority. and they don't know who to stick it to. And so that's what I'm saying. Just, you know, there's no big promise that you can do everything right and come out well at the other end of it.
How do we get beyond that? What do we do, Tania?
In terms of increasing...
Well, I mean, that to me is, you started off, Tracey, by saying that things could go either way, and I know what you mean. There's that sense that the algorithms are coming to, you know, are coming at us. We don't really understand where they are, how they work, and there's that sense of powerlessness. Actually, you've really put your finger on that, and I'm just wondering where we go from here.
So I think that trustworthiness from a technical point of view, you know, there's great work that's being done, you know, also AI Standards Hub, I know that there's a lot of focus on that, but I can't see, without getting a greater level of public understanding of AI, actually how that is really, we're kind of telling each other that we're creating trustworthy AI. The real proof is in how people, you know, relate to it, whether they get the kinds of products that they want and how they understand it. And so, in a way, when we're talking about trustworthy AI, we're describing a technology. It's not the technology; it's the people behind it who are making decisions, who are you know, deciding whether this is a good use case for AI or not, who are deciding what kind of data to use. Who, you know, it's people. It's people who are, you know, all over the world annotating data. And it's the fact that we use terms such as, you know, the algorithm in a way that, you know, we used to kind of maybe say, you know, the man, you know, it's the man, and actually it's still the man, you know, it's still the people, it's still the power structures, and I think the kind of focus on trustworthy AI is much more about, you know, understanding the human processes and decisions that go behind it. And so to be able to enable people to unpick that and think critically, yeah. I think that people need to understand more about how AI works. So that there are attempts to do this, but there's no real kind of program. In fact, in Jan 2021, when the AI Council put out recommendations for what is now the AI strategy, which launched about 9 months later, that they had a commitment to AI literacy. And that is one of the very few things that didn't make it into the strategy. And again, listening to Gary Marcus this morning, you know, who said AI literacy is as important as you know, numeracy or general literacy, and you know, in the world that we're living now, certainly over the last 4 months, I think there's been more of an acknowledgement of that, and I think that has to go hand in hand with anything we're doing from a technical level, because we need to have that input from people, and we need to be accountable as people, not just as systems.
Excellent. I wanted to bring you in, David, on this.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of building on that, I think we need to step back and really scrutinize what we mean by trust in general, right? So philosophers would say trust is what we would call generalized expectancy, right? So like we move around the world and we have reasonable expectations about how people will act, right? In ways that we can hold them accountable for, in ways that we perceive as being right and responsible.
I can't get access.
And so in a sense, I think that when we think about trust as it relates to AI, what we really need to think about is justified trust, right? So how do we move around having a kind of justified, reasonable expectation that these systems will kind of act and operate in our social environment in ways that don't harm us and harm each other, right? And I think that when you start from those basics, it actually, trustworthiness becomes a little bit easier to kind of discern, right? So when AI systems operate in the world, we have expectations, for instance, that they won't, you know, discriminate, and that they'll mitigate biases that might show up, right, in the data sets upon which they're trained. We have expectations that they'll be performant, right? That they'll perform accurately. And with equity as regards to the differential performance for different groups. We also have expectations that those who are building and using the systems will be both accountable, namely there won't be gaps in who's responsible for, certain elements of the systems that go wrong. And that's not only that, but that the building and using of the systems will be sufficiently transparent to hold them accountable. And we also have expectations about the data itself, that the data will be responsibly stewarded, that privacy will be respected. So I think just to say all of these, bigger picture reasonable expectations that we have come from concrete social need. And it's really not, at the end of the day, so much about the tech. We shouldn't be centered on the tech when we think about trustworthiness. We should think about those issues that are of grave concern to the public when these systems are being used in the context of their lives.
And
so just to say,
I think that's great, Dave, because it very much chimes with the top-rated question actually we've got here, and thanks very much for sending your questions in. So the top-rated question, the most liked question here is, how far is the issue of trust in AI an issue of trust in the institutions controlling it? Are people more scared of the algorithm or the intent of the owners? Now, the problem for someone like me is, when you look at who does control the tech, it is the Googles, the Metas, the big companies. Even, when we think about the Turing Institute, it's the kind of almost a big faceless institute for people who don't have a connection with it. I mean, presumably the mistrust is located in those institutions, is it? Who have maybe issues of commercial confidentiality. When people look at the perceptions of AI, how much do people themselves bring up the institutions involved? Who would like to take that?
I can pick up on that. I mean, so we see real differences in people's attitudes based on the institution that's using AI, as you might expect.
And is that what you were talking about, context dependence?
Yeah.
Right,
And I think intent's really important, but I think also perceptions of competence is also really important. So for example, and this is, we've did this big tracker survey, and we look at trust in a number of different institutions to use AI. One of the things we tend to see is there might be higher perceptions of kind of the intent within the public sector, but perhaps perceptions of lower competence than the private sector. This varies. It varies a lot by different use cases. But I think people don't just want to think you're doing the right thing and we trust you to try and be responsible, but people are also concerned about accuracy. And this is one of the things which kind of comes up quite a lot, is people will say, questions around whether they can trust AI to be involved in decision-making processes also come down to a sense of will there be an answer here that a human being can both interrogate but also can treat with a degree of validity, and that varies quite significantly. But I think that's a kind of trend that we see.
I think that's the key point, is recourse. Recourse.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that this whole sector is asking us to think again about what we mean by an ombudsman, and what kind of ombudsman type roles are played where in the system. Like, where do you go? And this, it comes down to sort of individual decisions, of course, because you can spend a lot of time. I really, really agree with Tania about literacy, because I think that ultimately you don't get accountability unless we can have a bigger, participation in the conversation. But I do think that we need to think about, when people's lives are affected by a decision, that they've got to have a sense in which there is a recourse. There is somewhere to go with that, because we can spend ages describing to people how it's fantastic, right? Because the machine, after realizing that it made a false association with assuming that you're not creditworthy, it then tested that assumption and corrected itself. Amazing. Meanwhile, 47,000 people got turned down for the mortgage, you know, and where does that come back at the situation? And so that's the sort of thing that we have to kind of realise. In the real world, this is not a mathematical problem, or this is not an interesting software dilemma, right? This is real
world
stuff
consequences.
Yeah, real world consequences.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, is a sense of recourse, and also perhaps the standards to which you hold yourselves. You know, that's the other thing that I think is really important, is to be really explicit about what expectations people should have about innovation in this area, because that's something that people can grasp and get hold of. You don't have to understand, you know, the ins and outs of test data to be able to see that someone should be accountable to something and know what that is. And I think that's where, you know, we need to focus.
Well, that's really interesting, because then we're sort of gradually working towards a list of things where actually if you can tick these boxes, ombudsman, accountability, then you might be shifting the dial on public perception. Talking of which, there is another really good question here. What outcomes should we care about when it comes to public perceptions? Do we want to measure fact-checking? Is it digital literary skills? And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it made me cast my mind back to the Pew poll, which was asking people, you know, giving them a list of technologies and saying which ones contain AI. So how do we measure outcomes on public perception?
So I'm going to start by echoing the fact that I think having we need the ombudsman, but we also need people to know where that ombudsman is, under what circumstances, they might contact them. So I think it's not just a gap in terms of having recourse. It's back to this kind of literacy thing, and so to bring it back to the kind of question about where do you start measuring perceptions. A lot of the surveys that have been done, the CDI one, you look at the word clouds, and the one thing that is in every word cloud, whether it's, whatever age group you are, whatever level of digital literacy, is scary and robot. They're the two words that pop out the most in any of those word clouds. And I think when we're talking about, all these, kind of ways that we can make AI trustworthy, I still feel it's kind of a little bit irrelevant if most people think that AI is a scary robot. And as much as we have data in public in the perceptions that says, well, it's contextual, it's different in, people have more trust in AI in healthcare than that they might do with, government or whatever it is. Because we don't have benchmarks on measuring how much the people who are answering that question actually have any idea what AI in healthcare it means or is like, or back to your point I think you were making about people misidentifying AI, and we have a little quiz on our website which asks people to identify AI around them, and most people think that Pokemon Go, so augmented reality, is AI, and that the ThoughtWorks, not ThoughtWorks, it'll come to me. A really good study, actually, Frameworks. It's got Works on it. April, I think, 2022, did a really great study that actually delved a bit more than the kind of just looking at a quantity survey, but actually started asking people, okay, so 65% of you say that you know what AI is. Now tell me. And I think that the scary robots, the 2019 survey also does this. The kind of people asked to actually prove that they might have an idea. And guess what? They tend to get it wrong. So how much does the data then on whether they trust the government? How much does that actually mean? Because they don't know a lot of the time what the applications are. So we need to think a lot about the applications. How the models are arrived at. And I think what I'm saying is, what do we measure? Well, first of all, let's work out how we measure what people know already, and let's get indicators, let's get frameworks where we know, what level of literacy people have, so that when we ask them questions, the answer's actually meaningful and tells us something that we can do something about. And there's been a lot of studies out there. I don't know what's happening with, what are people doing about the results? The data needs to be actionable, but then people also need to action it. Where are the interventions to say, well, people think that robots are, that AI is scary robots? Well, most of the pictures that we see, or a lot of the pictures that we see, at AI conferences, not this one, because the Turing Institute, AI UK, are brilliant at their visual communications, but a lot of them show a scary robot. So it's like, how are you going to get people to understand what AI is?
I want to... Sorry, I didn't want to run in there.
You need to stop me. I've gone forever.
No, that's okay. That's great, Tania. But it absolutely feeds into a really popular question here from Anthony. So thank you, Anthony, for sending this in. Should the UK national school curriculum do more to educate students on the benefits and risks of AI in the same way that they're educated on social media use? I'd love to get your brief thoughts on that. Who would like to... Actually, David, what do you think? Should this be on the national curriculum?
I do think that we are at the point now, an inflection point as Ben mentioned, in the sort of general purpose character of these technologies, where we do need to start early, and we do need to sort of bring, raise the consciousness as early as possible, right? Because it's not just that we need to have young people be thought about in the design, development, deployment of the systems, but we need them too to be able to manage the transformative effects of these systems, because they are having transformative effects on the children. And I'll just also add maybe one other thing about the previous question, if I might, which is that we also need to think about the supply side when we think about kind of measuring the sort of the level of perception. And what I mean there is we need to think about, where are citizens' assemblies, citizens' juries being held to raise consciousness? Where are democratic technology governance processes going on, like PPIE, for instance, in health-related AI? Where are other forms of co-design going on, where you have meaningful involvement of the public?
Sorry, David, can you tell me what PPIE is? Did you? Patient and public involvement and engagement, I think it is. Thank you. Yeah, that's one. I think for me, one sort of paradigmatic, good use case of raising public perception is in health-related data use and health-related AI. I think it's in the health use case, it's always been important to build sort of sufficient public consent, right, with regard to technology, and we're really seeing development in the participation side, public participation side, when it comes to AI. But anyway, just the thought there was just, we do need to, when we think in general about how to measure the development of public perception, we also need to hold responsible those who are on the side of spurring that and cultivating it through institutional resource.
I think also that there's, through the sorts of kind of tools for trustworthy AI that we develop, there is a way to improve public understanding and knowledge there by ensuring that people build an understanding of AI as they come into contact with it. So not just in the classroom or more kind of abstractly, but people can help to understand AI when they're engaging with tools. So the transparency standard that we've launched has two tiers of transparency. There is a more technical level, which perhaps would be suitable for researchers or people in this room to really kind of interrogate kind of questions around interrogating algorithms to understand whether things can and processes can be truly trusted. But then there is also a piece around how you communicate that to citizens who may not have degrees in data science, and how you can ensure that you're informing those quite different audiences. But I think there is a piece that came through from our public engagement for that work, that people really want to have more active transparency. So they want to know about both who's using an algorithm, what they're using it for, who do I speak to? I've got a query or a concern at the point of contact with an algorithmic system. And I think just to come back to the point earlier around kind of kite marks, I think as we become kind of more sophisticated in our understanding, I think it'll probably be quite hard to have a kind of a kite mark across the piece for AI, but it probably starts more from the position of like, what do we think good governance and good practice look like in different sectors? And then think through how do we evidence that to the public to show that there is a trustworthy process. So in healthcare, for example, what good looks like and what bad looks like, and what we should be concerned about is quite different to say farming. And then in farming there might be issues around product safety, for example, which could be really important, and you'd be wanting to really go into some depth in terms of how you certify AI in that context. Whereas in healthcare there might be issues around bias or other things. So I think we need to kind of get to that next level of detail.
I think we're going to really take the shine off a few products for people, aren't we? Because everyone's got these apps, these health apps on their phones and their watches, and they think that they're being diagnosed in real time by these apps. And if you actually had across the front of it, based on data from people like you, you'd like, oh, okay, that's not so interesting. But I think in some places there are other places to learn from. So, for example, not a million miles from here, just across the other side of the city, there was a huge project that was built, first time that a hotel's been built over rail, that went over, it went over the Docklands Light Railway, it went over the underground, it went over the overground. And can you imagine how many systems had to talk to each other for this? Okay, it was an 8-month construction project. It was a 12-month commissioning project in which every stage of this had to have named individuals who were signing stuff off, and who you contacted if you were working on the London Underground and you were worried about something in the construction. You contacted that person, and it was very, that's very open and very publicised. So you didn't have to teach everybody what is the London Underground system for, indicating a fire on the track or whatever. But what you had to do was to name clearly that such a system exists and a person was responsible. And I think those sorts of things that we can learn from civil engineering and other places where commissioning is really advanced might be helpful here too in terms of a public interface. But I do want to say, Anjana, in relation to what David was saying earlier, citizens' juries and public participation in co-creation and so on is something I'm a huge fan of, and David knows we've led the way on this in Sense About Science. But I think in some parts of this we need to move into central, where we're seeing applications that really do affect people's lives or affect the nature of government decisions. I think we need to move people directly into a conversation with power about how that power is being exercised, not just how should it be presented and described and we should learn about it, but actually, maybe we actually have an ombudsman that is designed and called for by the public, for example.
Excellent. And I'm going to combine two questions here because I think it does go back to this essential point about who has the power. So we had two questions. One was from Gregor. The same companies that lost public trust through their development of social media are at the forefront of AI. Can they ever be trustworthy? And then the second bit of that, it's a different question, but I think they're both getting to the same point. This is anonymous. Would love to get the panel's thoughts on how an ombudsman for AI would work. Can we force big tech to be compliant? So these are the two questions. These are two I want you to give yes/no answers to, really, each of you. So the first one was, can those tech companies ever be trustworthy? And if you did have an ombudsman, could they be forced to be compliant? I'm going to go to you, David, first for a yes/no. To either of those?
Yes, I think we can think of a future where we have more trustworthiness, holding big tech power accountable. And I think the way we get there is through effective public action, effective regulation, effective and symmetrical, while also proportionate intervention, statutory intervention that also gets at the root causes of some of the what I would think of as kind of pathological market-driven behavior, which is to say we need to think about the incentives. We need to think about how the market incentivizes certain behavior which may not be serving the public interest, which may not be serving the social good. And we need to get right into the root causes of that kind of malformed incentivization. And so yes to that first question. And then on the ombudsman question, I think that that's kind of complementary in a way, right? We need the means to, right, holds power, larger corporate power accountable, and
so it is possible.
Yeah,
it is possible. Tania, sorry. Can we ever trust those tech companies, and can we force them to comply with the rules of the road as they come out?
I would say probably not under the regulation that's currently proposed. I think there would need to be more than is on the plate. I mean, there's antitrust stuff going on in the US that might be relevant, but I think that exactly what David said about the incentives. The incentives are not there, and if you're thinking about the incentives, but also the carrot and the stick is not there either. So I'm less optimistic, which I think is one of the reasons why I feel very strongly that more people need to be advocating and getting involved to try and make it a shareholder priority to behave in ways that are less detrimental. On ombudsman, could there be an ombudsman? I think I answered this earlier by saying, again, not under the current situation with the general levels of AI. I say literacy, but by that I mean a variety of things. Basically, it's not in a skills-based level, but just an understanding of what decisions are even being made about you. We put forward, if anyone's interested in following this up, we put forward an idea on a charter just on how you even communicate about AI. And this is what I'm going to do my plug. We're short of minutes on better images of AI. But there's also, how we use language and how we anthropomorphize and how we hype. And I think there's other things we need to do that have to go with that. And ombudsman's not going to solve it all.
So, Tracey, very quick, a yes or a no, can we trust the tech?
Yeah, but let's just make sure, right? Shareholders are actually our friend when it comes to this, because shareholders hate surprises. So anything pro-transparency, you'll find that shareholders are a really good way to get involved. So I think let's just make sure that tech can be trusted by encouraging them with things that they can't ignore. And ombudsman, let's not get hung up with when we say the word man on the end of ombudsman. I don't mean to suggest that there is one man or woman or anywhere that is. Let's think of the concept and think about what does that mean in a modern 21st century way for a world that's engaging with all these different products of AI. It may be something that looks very different from an ombudsman of the past, but I think about that role, that recourse to somebody who will broker your question in the way that maybe a librarian. Even. I mean, we're getting rid of our librarians right at the time when we need information literacy. Maybe we have a 21st century librarian. Who is that for us?
So Ben, same question. And will it make any difference, the public perceptions of AI?
So I think public perceptions will make a difference. I think big tech companies can be trusted if there are the tools and processes in place which enable them to be able to operate responsibly and to ensure that regulators are able to hold companies to account. I think it's not just about the big kind of cloud computing services. It's also about how they're used and the way that they're used in different contexts and organisations. And so that requires also regulators across the piece. So not just regulators which are thinking about particular kind of tech issues, but also regulators which may not think of themselves as being kind of tech regulators, but about different contexts and sectors, to be able to really build that understanding and then have the tools in place to be able to hold organisations to account, to ensure that they are meeting societal expectations for those different contexts. So it requires all of us to up our game, not just people who think about themselves as being in the world of AI and technology and the sort of people who come to conferences like this.
Thank you. I think that's a really good place to wrap up. Thanks for all the questions, really brilliant. And I know there were so many things we didn't get to talk about, and some of them came out in the questions, which are, we're not all the same. One of the things I worry about is marginalised communities having different perceptions and how that then feeds into sort of further marginalisation. But I'm hoping that will come up somewhere else in the conference, and maybe we can talk about that. David, I hope you're going to be on the research stage after this. Is that right? You're going to be appearing virtually? Great. So people can catch you there after the break. So we have a short break now. I'll see you all back here at 4 p.m. We have a brilliant panel on equality, diversity and inclusion, how to do better in data science and AI. But of course, before anyone moves for their coffee and tea, can we please thank our panellists? Tracey Brown, Tania Duarte and Ben Barnes, and David Leslie. Thank you.